Bob Barr represented the 7th District of Georgia in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1995 to 2003 and was the 2008 Libertarian Party nominee for President of the United States. He practices law with the law offices of Edwin Marger and runs a consulting firm, Liberty Strategies, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Bob occupied the 21st Century Liberties Chair for Freedom and Privacy at the American Conservative Union and is currently a member of the Constitution Project's Initiative on Liberty and Security. He serves as a board member for Privacy International. Former New York Times columnist William Safire called him Mr. Privacy. Bob also serves on the boards of directors for the National Rifle Association and One Force, the company providing domestic and international security. He was the chief prosecutor during the Bill Clinton impeachment trial. I could go on all day. And I hope you'll forgive me, Bob, for any number of things I may have left out, but it is my pleasure to welcome back to the Global Freedom Report, Bob Barr. How are you, Bob?
I'm doing fine, and it's great to be with you once again.
Thank you, and happy holiday to you and yours, and Happy New Year. May it be a Happy New Year.
Thank you.
You spent enough time in Washington to maybe be able to offer an insider's perspective on the evolution of the federal government's attitude toward the American people. In general, how would you characterize that attitude? How do federal officials see their relationship to the American people? What do they think of the people they govern?
Well, in many respects, of course, the only time they think about them is if they're an elected official during an election cycle or when they're actually doing some work for constituents. And, of course, the career officials really see themselves as working for the government and not working for the people. So there's always frequently a disconnect there. There are certainly some elected officials in the House and the Senate at the federal level who do have a clear connection with and understanding of their role as working for the people who elect them and the people in their district or state that they represent. But more often than not, folks in Washington, elected and appointed, vote and take actions based on simply looking at issues as government issues. These are things government should do or should not do, and it's a matter of exercising power, not exercising responsibility.
Now that is quite a distinction. I like that. That's a soundbite. How would you, and we're going to talk about like national defense authorization in a moment, but overall, January to December, how would you summarize 2011? We're just about at the end in terms of civil liberties, justice, and rule of law.
Certainly it has not been a good year for any of those three topics. The administration in Washington, the Obama administration this year in 2011 has continued its policies of 2010 and 2009, which basically continued the anti-civil liberties, anti-liberty, and anti-freedom agenda of the prior 8 years of the Bush administration. And we've seen this time and again, certainly domestically, in the effort to uphold the so-called Obamacare legislation. Domestically, we've seen it in continuing a trend towards sort of Europeanization of the American financial system. And despite early talk to the contrary by the Obama administration and by the president himself when he ran for president back in 2008, this has not been an administration that is a friend of civil liberties in this country.
Well, now, when you consider that for this year at least, the House has been of a different party than the president, you would think that would at least slow down any attacks on civil liberties and justice and the rule of law. And if nothing else, that it would make Congress stagnant, and therefore the president would gain no new powers. But that's not really how it works, is it?
No, it really isn't. We saw this with the Bush administration when during those 6 years that the President Bush, the last President Bush, Bush II, had a Republican Congress, basically a compliant Congress. And the Congress wound up essentially viewing itself and being viewed by President Bush as simply another vehicle for presidential power and presidential policies. There was no check balance there. Now, that changed to some extent when the Democrats, the Democratic Party, can regain control of the House after the 2006 election. And for the last 2 years of the Bush administration, at least there was some appropriate tension between the House and the administration. And I have to say that there has been, on the domestic front, not in the civil liberties arena, but in the economic arena, there has been at least some degree of resurgence of the Republican Party standing for something other than the Bush doctrine of more government, but with a conservative coating on it. The current House leadership and the current House majority of the Republican Party has done with regard to taxes, and at least to some extent, not as much as we'd like, but to some extent federal spending, there has been some pushback to the Obama administration that we've seen with regard to Obamacare, for example, and the policies on the current federal budget extension and the debt ceiling and so forth. So at least there has been a little bit of a resurgence of a more fiscally responsible economic policy in the House. Not enough, but certainly at least a little bit.
Well, from what according to the latest Gallup, the House is ending the year with its lowest approval rating ever, which is saying something. And the message to me is that the people want the House to be more obstructive of the executive branch, not less. They want them to do more, not just deal with the economy, but deal with all of it. And that's, at least that's the message I think that they're sending. What do you think about that?
That is certainly part of it, and this is the result, to some extent, of the development and growth of the so-called Tea Party movement. It's, to some extent, I think, the result of Ron Paul's campaign, not just this year, but going back to the last presidential race in 2008, keeping the issues of the Federal Reserve and the debt ceiling and the national debt, taxation, front and center. To some extent, it's the result of some of the, or a number of the Republican presidential candidates, including former candidate Herman Cain, including Newt Gingrich to some extent, and certainly Ron Paul, to keep these issues out there, the tax and so forth. Now, whether or not whoever the Republican nominee is will continue to press these issues, we don't know. I hope so. But at least there has been some serious effort on the part of these Republican candidates for president to keep the issues of smaller government, tax reform out there. Now, there also are those that look at Congress and don't like what they see because they want Congress to be doing more, and they see that a lot isn't getting done. So it's sort of both sides of that coin. There are those like yourself and myself and a lot of our more conservative friends out there who view the role of Congress not to keep doing things because when Congress does things, when they pass laws, generally speaking, what they're doing is taking away liberty and taking away our resources, which means taking liberty. Yeah. But there are also those out there who want Congress to be doing more and are upset because they're not working with the administration, so to speak.
All right, let's talk National Defense Authorization Act. Recently it was passed by both houses of Congress. What can you tell us about this bill?
It's very unfortunate because the Defense Authorization Bill normally and ought to be simply a funding mechanism for our military needs and operations and the Department of Defense. Unfortunately, this year, and this has happened a few times in recent years, it's become a vehicle for expanded government power. And this year, very unfortunately, there's a provision that relates to the power of the military, the U.S. military, that is, to make a determination, a unilateral determination that a U.S. citizen or U.S. citizens are somehow connected with a terrorist organization and therefore are to be considered so-called enemy combatants and therefore subject to adverse action by the U.S. military, which would include imprisonment without due process, without before a civilian court, and indefinite detention. That is, detention by the military until the hostilities cease, which would be never according to the way the government views war on terrorism.
But here's the thing. First off, okay, assuming that that's exactly what's in there, and I have a question about it, but assuming that the case, it seems very clear that Congress doesn't have the authority to do that. Congress can't just pass any law it wants. It is bound by the limitations of the Constitution. And the Constitution does not allow the military to do these things. So it would seem to me, number one, that such a provision would automatically be void on its face. But in S. 1867, which was the Senate version, there was a provision, Section 1032, subsection B, that specifically excluded U.S. citizens and legal residents from the military detention clause. Now, as far as I know, that was not in the House version, resulting in a conference. I don't know what the final version looks like. I don't know if this provision that you just mentioned is still in it. Have you seen the final version of this?
I haven't, and this is a problem with the process whereby you have two competing versions of a piece of legislation, and it goes to a conference committee. You don't know what's going on, and frequently the members of both bodies, the House and the Senate, then will have the conference report that comes back to them very quickly, sometimes very fast track, virtually no time to review it or understand what's in it. And because it contains, in this case, funding for the military, there will be tremendous pressure on members in both houses, in both parties, just go ahead and pass it. Otherwise, you'll be accused of not supporting the troops. The provision itself was very complex, very difficult to understand, because at least in one version of it, it didn't say directly, or it did not directly, explicitly give the military power, but it did so indirectly by indicating that the resolution for the authorization for the use of military force, which was passed in the immediate aftermath of the September 11, 2001 attacks, that authorization, which I was there, I'd listened to the debate and voted on it, had nothing to do with any of this. It had simply to do with identifying those responsible for the 9/11 attacks and taking action against them through force if necessary. That was all it did. It's become since then the vehicle for all manner of acts, including warrantless surveillance of American citizens. So there are some that believe that authorization for the use of military force from 2001 does authorize the military, empower the military to arrest whoever they might consider to be an enemy combatant without expressly identifying or not identifying them as a U.S. citizen. So it's very unclear and consequently very dangerous.
Well, now let me ask you. You've seen, you've been on both sides of the fence. You are, Mr. Privacy. You see what's happening with civil liberties, with the rule of law. You see all of this going on, and you keep your finger on the pulse of it. Do you think we're going to start to see people like me, maybe even people like you, being picked up under this provision?
Certainly not in the short term. The great danger is that they will one, we won't know because a lot of this might be done in secret and might not even become public, at least for some period of time. And secondly, they would probably initially use it to go after those who are converts to Muslim and who have said certain things or contributed to certain humanitarian organizations, for example, that the government alleges through secret watch lists.
Oh yeah, but they're also making it real clear. They're setting it up that standing up and speaking out against government is a form of domestic terrorism. And once they do that,
oh no doubt about it, that is the direction in which we're going. What I'm saying is, I don't think that they would do that initially. The danger would be that they would start setting precedents through cases that the general public would look at and say, oh, well, yeah, we understand that was somebody who was Muslim, who was railing against U.S. forces or whatnot.
In other words,
so
boiling the
frog. What I'm saying is I think we see, some initial uses of such a power to go after individuals not like you or others who simply use the airwaves or the media to discuss personal freedom and who are adverse to government power, but that would set the groundwork for it later on to set precedent.
Yeah, it's the foresight that people don't have. They don't see what's going to happen in the future if they don't do something now. Let me shift gears a little bit. You were a prosecutor, so you understand what it's like to represent the state and the state's interests. And now that you're not on that side of the aisle anymore, how would you characterize the growing number of incidents involving cops assaulting, battering, even murdering peaceful protesters?
Well, we see this in a number of areas. We see it certainly with regard to protesters. We see it also with regard simply to police officers in various locales, including here in Georgia, some incidents recently with some federal law enforcement officials, Park Service. But we see it a lot with local, local law enforcement, which is becoming overly militaristic, I think, with all of the military accoutrements of automatic weapons and SWAT uniforms and now use of drone aircraft and so forth, becoming more militarized and thinking with a military mindset as opposed to a domestic law enforcement civil liberties mindset, which is the way law enforcement is supposed to operate. But we're seeing police become so enamored of power that they don't want to be, for example, photographed or videoed while they're going after somebody, and so then they see that somebody's videotaping them, so then they arrest that person or confiscate the camera or whatnot. It's a sad combination of poor training, overly militaristic, overly violent training on the part of the police, and you couple that with situations such as we've seen with protesters and so forth, and it makes for a very unfortunate situation.
Well, now let me tag on to that, because too often today, now again, I want to put you in your prosecutor's mindset for a moment, because too often today, government excesses, such as what you just described, are forgiven because the guilty parties were found to be following official policy. We hear about it all the time. Well, according to our policy, the police did nothing wrong in this circumstance, even though common sense tells you something wrong was done. And it all sounds dangerously close to, I was only following orders. Now, I believe law should trump policy. The U.S. government believes the opposite, and court rulings go along with that. If policy trumps law, then what hope do the people have that government thugs will ever be held accountable for their actions?
Ultimately, we have no comfort and no assurance that liberty will prevail. The government, both the government as an institution or institutions, as well as individuals clothed with official authority that is operating on behalf of the government, they must be subservient to the law. and placing a president, whether it's President Nixon or President Bush or President Obama, above the law filters all the way down very quickly from the president to cabinet to sub-cabinet officials to government, federal government employees to state, local law enforcement. So if local law enforcement sees and reads that a president believes that they have to do certain things, notwithstanding what the law says, because they have to protect the country or their community, and that is, in their view, the most important responsibility of government, which of course it isn't. Most important responsibility of government is to protect our liberty. Then you very quickly have this filter down, percolate down, so that law enforcement believes that they too have to do whatever it takes, so to speak, to catch lawbreakers, to protect other citizens, regardless of whether or not civil liberties, the Constitution, and even the laws are respected.
You are known as Mr. Privacy. In today's surveillance-crazed world, what do you recommend people do to maintain as much privacy as possible?
To think about it. So many times the problem is people just engage in various activities that in and of themselves may seem very innocent. Sending a social networking message and not paying attention to who it goes to or how people can access it. Getting certain discount cards and using them. Buying these passes that allow you to go through toll booths and so forth without stopping. If people simply take a couple of moments to think about who they're giving that information to, and more importantly, who down the road will be able to access it and for what purposes, for example, in lawsuits, in legal actions or in criminal actions by the government or whatnot, I think people would be a little bit hesitant to engage in a lot of the communications that they're engaged in. People need to also pay close attention to what government is doing. I mentioned a little bit ago the use of drone aircraft now that were developed and used initially by our military overseas now are being used domestically in this country for law enforcement purposes and perhaps other purposes by governments, local governments even, for example, without any real thought for the violation of the fundamental right to privacy that we have in this country.
And that everybody has. A right to privacy is not granted, it's inherent.
It's a basic human right. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, final question. Ron Paul was just found by the public policy poll to be leading the candidates in Iowa. What do you think of his candidacy, and do you think he has a real chance to become the party nominee?
To the last question, no, I don't see that happening. To the first question, though, more importantly, all of us as conservatives and as libertarians owe him a great debt of gratitude for working tirelessly to keep these issues of limited government front and center. I think if it weren't for Ron Paul keeping these issues alive and pressing them constantly over the last 4 years, the issues that the various Republican candidates are touting right now would be very different, as a matter of fact.
All right. Do you have any books or speaking engagements or anything else you want people to know about your work and activity?
Probably the best thing to do, Brent, would be just to refer them to our website, www.bobbarr.org, and they can obtain copies of my various writings. I write on a regular basis for the Daily Caller, the electronic newspaper, conservative newspaper out of D.C., and, of course, give speeches for the Federalist Society and other groups. And they can find that, all of that information and sort of what I'm doing on the Bob Barr website. Excellent.
And my guest has been former Congressman Bob Barr, and Mr. Privacy, if you will, www.bobbarr.org. Bob, let me wish you and yours a happy holiday, a Merry Christmas, and an absolutely delightful, I'm really hoping for all of us to have a happy New Year, considering what's happening around us. Thanks so much for being with us and for the work you continue to do.
Thank you for spreading the word, Brent, and thank you for having me once again. Take care.
God bless. Bob Barr.